these protests, because a number of things were happening. The ethnic crashes were beginning to show up immediately after the opening up of the multi-party. And he has always maintained this sober way of looking at things. And what I thought was a departure from the Irungu of the past is this appreciation that this is a political process. And I want to move his argument further and say, this is war. It is not politics. Because politics is basically a game of the possible. You give and take. That's what politics is all about. And therefore, politics has never been war. But the moment you elevate politics into war, then that is when temperatures go up. And I think the fundamental question to ask, I don't want to go through the list of the legitimate or illegitimate claims that are being made, because that's subject to an academic debate. You say, I want us to look at it from a perspective of war, and then ask three fundamental questions in terms of scenarios. What does victory look like for Raila Odinga in this situation? Because that's the only way of able to deal with the crisis we are in. What does victory look like? Because all this list of grievances are basically heightening up temperature towards a certain end game. And the end state here is, what does victory look like for Raila Odinga? Second, what does victory look like for Uhuru Kenyatta behind the curtains? Because he's still the chair of Azimio, right? And he's the retired, the immediate former president of the land. Third, what does victory look like for Ruto and his troops, particularly the radical wing of Ruto's politics, and you know them by their names. Now, answers to these three questions point to a polarized nation, badly polarized, and that a country that is hurtling down to anarchy. There doesn't seem, because for Raila, and he has been very clear about this from his church pronouncements and so on, he's looking for regime change. And the regime change here is a delegitimation of the government, and therefore offering Azimio as the legitimate alternative. That is not the kind of regime change that Irungu is talking about, that everybody wants a regime change. Regime change must be by law or not by law. And the African Union has pronounced itself on this in its peace and the protocol establishing the Peace and Security Commission, or rather, architecture. It is very clear that any change of government within the African soil must be by law. It doesn't matter whether people call it legitimate or not, but it has to be by the established law of the land. Therefore, what victory looks like for Odinga is not right for the country.
Right. Before
Before
I needed to prod it a bit, but from what conclusion that are you coming with that assessment that is coming up with the effort to make sure that he wants to delegitimize this government?
But he has said it. I mean, if you look at all the lists, one, the IBC process was wrong. Two, the Supreme Court judgment was wrong. And three, the commissioners who were there were divided. It is a process of delegitimation of the system.
But is he wrong? Is he wrong?
No, yes, very wrong.
Tell us why.
Because because these are the institutions we have set for ourselves. Who is he to judge? We put our case before our institutions. I think I was unhappy, personally, in Murang'a. I was very unhappy about Jubilee and the way they denied me the ticket. And I had the capacity, given what the kind of mobilization I had done,
indeed,
to set the
but what one will actually construe from what you're saying is, you want to delegitimize the government so that you can actually prop your own ascendancy.
No, that is the point.
So is that what he is actually saying? Because people might actually pick it up. He wants to topple the government so that he might.
What Odinga is doing, when you say you want to march to State House, and you know that the seat of government is not for a State House, it is Harambee Avenue, that building there, that you know, if you have been in the government. And he knows his seat when he was Prime Minister was the office across the road. So that's where you take petitions. Right? So let me finish. Let's not be jittery about this. We're talking about our nation.
We're not jittery. We just want clarification.
So we are saying, what does victory? Because if you don't understand what victory looks like for the various actors, then you cannot even help them reconcile. For Odinga, it's regime change through the legitimation government. For Uhuru, it's the same because this is what they are supporting. For Ruto, it is basically vanquishing the opposition. And what does vanquishing the opposition mean? It means basically taking us to the old cold days of the one-party state and that tyranny, and then that's not very healthy for the country. So what do we need here? First, we must identify the key actors in this conflict. The key actor in this conflict is not Raila versus Ruto. No. This is a problem that started in 2017, long before Raila came into the scene. It's a Jubilee issue. It is a split within Jubilee, and I can tell you when it started, in March 2015, and it escalated from that point. By the time the handshake is coming, it is the same confusion we have in Addis Ababa, that
March 2018.
Abiy is going to Asmara, and you think he's going for a peace process, and even the Norwegian Nobel Peace Prize give him a peace prize. He's going for a military pact, because already him and the Tigrayans had fallen out. Uhuru and Ruto had fallen out after 2015 for reasons that are internally known. When he's going for the handshake, he's going for another pact with Odinga to contain Ruto. So the talk must first be between Ruto and Uhuru. Uhuru to respect Ruto, and Ruto to basically make peace with Uhuru. Then you deal with the Raila and his mass action about the cost of living. That's my business. That's not Raila's business. I'm the one suffering.
All right. So Raila is the pawn in the game of chess here.
He's a gun for hire.
No.
Yeah.
Debal, I disagree with my learned senior, and the reasons that I disagree with him are very simple. I think that Uhuru Kenyatta did one of the bravest things that any politician in this country could do. And what was that he did, Debal? Mr. Uhuru reached out to Mr. Odinga. In fact, the information that I have is that he drove to his house in the night, knocked at the door, and told him, Mr. Odinga, what is the problem between you and I? And for days they sat in Mr. Odinga's house. And they started from the day of independence up to today. And they talked about the politics of exclusion. They talked about the problems of this country. And they talked about what hurts us. They talked about how we could solve it. There was no more recalcitrant opposition figure in this country to Raila Odinga than Uhuru Kenyatta. He used to speak in Kikuyu, Agikuyu in Central Province, calling him this man from that mimi sina shida na Wajaluo, niko na shida na Raila Odinga, but everybody knew what he was saying. He was a radical. He really opposed Mr. Odinga. Mr. Ruto worked with Mr. Odinga. Mr. Odinga, when I was the strategist at the Pentagon, we used to work for the Pentagon. Mr. Ruto was in our block. He was a member of an ODM, a founder member of an ODM. Mr. Ruto is not a radical, anti-Odinga, anti-Luo Nyanza leader in this country. He is not. Mr. Kenyatta walked out of an ODM meeting in which I was sitting in the middle negotiating between Mr. Raila Odinga and Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta on how to bring Kanu into ODM. He walked out. Mr. Ruto stayed. It is not true that Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta is a man who was opposed to Mr. Ruto. He went out and reached out to Mr. Odinga and said, we need to reconcile the mountain and the lake, because this country cannot continue in this way. Why did he fight with Mr. Ruto? Because he had promised Mr. Ruto to be the next president and support him in the prior dispensation. And when that failed, Mr. Ruto righteously had a pact with Mr. Odinga, and that pact had broken, and Mr. Ruto did what any politician would do. He walked out. He walked out of the government, morally speaking. Now, all these things we are privy to. There are more things we are privy to that we're not going to say on national television. But what we want to do, Debali, is bring people together. We do not want to take things apart. Condemning Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta is not going to help us bring people together. It will not. Condemning Mr. Odinga for mass action is not going to help us. Telling Mr. Ruto to leave power or to resign is not going to help this country. What we need is to speak the way we are speaking here. The way we are speaking here, for them to speak in that way. And about, I want to say something else about how people should speak. There is today in this continent, it's the Ghanaians who are leading the way in political philosophy. There is three men. One is Aikwe Arma, the other is Atu Sechi Otu, and lastly Kwame Anthony Appiah, probably one of the leading philosophers in the African continent today and in the world. And I just want to quote something very small about what he said in a certain book the other day. The challenge then is to take minds and hearts formed over the long millennia of living in local truths and equip them with the ideas and institutions that will allow us to live together in the global tribe that we have become. Kenya has to find its place in the global tribe that we're in. And how do we do that? We have to do it with ideas and institutions. What institutions do we need in Kenya? What is the legitimate concern of the opposition? The Electoral Commission, the referee as to who comes into power. That is one. Number one. Number two is the Supreme Court. I, as Ahmed Hashi, accepted the results. Right? Because there's no other court for us to appeal except the court of God, our Creator. Correct? I don't think Mr. Odinga wants to become president through the back door. What Mr. Odinga is trying to say is that these are the institutions and the ideas that have failed us, that we believe in the opposition that took our victory away from us. Whether they're right or wrong is not the issue. The issue is, did the institutions concerned present credible results that the people of Kenya would say he won and he lost? That's the problem. And if we don't go to that place and solve that place, Debal, in the next 5 years, I will stand for the presidency and say, oh, the elections were stolen, and go here to Langata and organize a demonstration and ask for dialogue. We have to change. We cannot continue doing this vicious cycle.
Right. So we'll come to, I think we're going back to
clockwise.
Yes, so, I was thinking, did we ourselves really plant this particular seed if we dial back to, the handshake itself? And then we had the Hasla and the dynasties, sort of vitriol that was coming. And people were really talking about this populist notion of the Hasla and the dynasty. What we saw raiding the farm is a reflection of what people are talking in the streets, that you will go and invade your farms. And this has become now a war between, let's just face it, the Hasla and the dynasty. How then do we go back to uproot what was being sown? Because no one is really talking about it, but in the face of it, truly, this is the dynasty and the Hasla who are fighting right now.
I think we have all the signs really of a misgoverned situation at the moment. And when I say govern, I don't mean government, I mean governance. So it's much bigger than government. So it is not just that the government needs to think how to manage this, but I think all of us need to think how to manage this. The independent offices, the opposition parties, the media, civil society organizations, the business community, the religious leaders. I mean, I think this is now a society issue. I was interested a little bit in the comment that was raised by Kagwanja, and he talked a little bit about, what would victory look like for Raila? And I think it's a great question even for Ruto. What would victory look like in this moment? Because I think in a moment where you have this conflict that is beginning to spiral, initially it started off as a political conflict, but now what we've seen is that you not only have dimensions of class tension, which is the invasion of the Northlands and Spectre and other places. But you also have intra-class dynamics, which is the issue around Kibra yesterday. So I was in Kibra, and it's just heartbreaking just to see all those businesses destroyed along Karanja. And if that's not enough, you now have the beginnings of ethnic tension, right, and religious tension, right. So if you have, and you have to get the picture of the mosque and the church. They are literally facing each other. There's a stream that separates them. You can walk across the stream. It is said that Muslims essentially walked across, and Christians basically attacked the mosque. And then the mosque, Muslims retaliated and burned down or attacked the church. How is it possible that two places of worship can be destroyed by people who worship? And I think that's the sign. That is I guess that is the red line that we must not cross. Coming back to I think Kagwanja's comment about what would victory look like. The art of war. People use it very effectively when they're thinking about game theory and what how do you manage a situation, how do you politically engage, but they forget the first chapter is all about, in fact the message of that book is all about how do you avoid war at all costs. So the message to the generals at this point, the message to those people who would like to escalate the situation should be, if you read that book properly, the first thing is actually how do you diffuse the possibility of war. Right, and I think how we diffuse the possibility of war essentially is looking at what discussions, conversations need to take place. And I'm not proposing handshakes. I think it's really important to recognize that there is for the democracy to work, for our constitution to breathe, it has to accept the idea of that there will be a government and there will be an opposition. Right? So I think that's the return to reason that we need right now. And I don't think we've often said this. I think it's not an original quote, but it's often said that politics is too important to leave to politicians.
Yes.
Right? We have to all get involved now.
Yeah. All hands on deck. Yes. Professor Nomi Damba.
Quoting you.
Dubal, President Uhuru went to Tanzania and met Magufuli. Magufuli was really opposed to Kenyans, our system, our goal, our way of, and Uhuru then chose to go all the way to Magufuli's father, where he was sick, and shake his hand. And Magufuli look at Uhuru and say, hey, what kind of man is this? And the whole ego changed. And until he died, Magufuli worked very close with Uhuru. Is that correct? So here's what I'm saying. President Ruto is the president of Kenya. The buck
stops with him.
Stopped on his desk. And the president, when you give him the instrument of power, ought to use all the instrument of power, including the handshake. The president cannot say, this is what I can do, this is what I cannot do. And therefore, what we are all saying here is an agreement which sets stage for compromise. Diffusion of what's happened. I spent years studying diffusion in defense strategy. And so the point, this is where we are right now, and we are appealing to the president to ignore all the noisemakers and what is happening and do the right thing and bring them together, bring those two people together. The reasonable people, they have worked together. Has talked very specifically about the history. It can be done right now so that we can put the country back prior to where it was prior to election. Dubal, you can walk in Mombasa proud that nobody will follow you with a gun or anything. You can walk in Kisumu and things were moving ahead. Investors were coming. This is the stage where we need to go, Dubal, in order to focus on healthcare, focus on food security, focus on infrastructure development, which we need to do in this country.
Right. Thank you. So, a discussion, and I wanted just to bring on the table the issue of political humility. We know even in the institutions of academia, about intellectual arrogance and yeah. But when we come to politics, you're talking about it's too pivotal to leave politics to politicians, and here is two very inflated egos that now are on the table, and we are asking how they can tone down and come to a place where they can see eye to eye. How practical is it to bring the notion of political humility? And in what way can we let political, or maybe looking down on the streams of time where Raila has been, Ruto has been, he's given us some previous information that he was involved where Ruto was on the table, he walked away, Raila stayed, talking about political humility. How can it now be brought to bear in this current stalemate that we're in?
Countries do better when they have the heads of states as peacemakers rather than warriors. And warriors here can be people who really want to vanquish others, or people who are bearers of extremist ideas. So you don't have to fight, but if you are a carrier of extremist ideas and you are at the helm of the state, you have already declared war on your country, because the other alternative thought against which you are and you are seen, you are already at war with it. Now, Kenya, we have not had the opportunity to have the structures and systems that others have had to socialize their political leadership before it comes to power, to what we need. And I remember when we were making the new constitution, because I happen to have been the unfortunate one or fortunate one, depending on where you
can hold you personally responsible.
Yeah, where you are, to intellectually think through, not to draft like the way our friends were doing, the committee of experts, but to think through the ideas that should govern us. And we were debating about America versus Britain. The British have a head of state who is a queen, or now a king. The Americans have a president who is the head of state, and at the same time the head of government in one way. But then we're talking about diffusion of power. In Kenya, we went crudely under Jomo Kenyatta and took away the powers of the Queen as head of state and those of the Prime Minister, and merged them and came up with this imperial presidency that we talked about. And the culture of politics that has emerged from there has differed from time to time. It was at its best under Kibaki, not because the constitution dictates so, but because Kibaki was a peacemaker, not a warrior. Now, I do recall when the country went on fire in January 2008, and Kofi Annan jetted and overthrew the Rift Valley and elsewhere.
It was a disaster.
Yeah, and threw everywhere. Kofi Annan came here and you could see the weaknesses of a man. He said, Mr. President, I think you need to get the military out. To do what? You need to get the military out. These people are going to finish each other. And the Kibaki somebody asked, the military is going to fight who? Who is the military going to fight? And they said, okay, we can bring neutral forces from the UN.
No.
You see, to fight who? These are Kenyans. We are going to sort our own problem. That was Kibaki's idea. In other words, that kind of restraint is of a peacemaker rather than of a warrior. Because if Kibaki was a warrior, he would have literally taken the military and started mowing down other Kenyans. Now, in this particular case, and to talk about sobriety of leadership, I think it's about Ruto committing himself to the so-called the Prince of Peace. Is the Prince of Peace, and at any provocation, at any point of question, he has to remain a Prince of Peace, because this country has more divisions than it can handle.
Correct.
Religious, ethnic, racial, generational. We have all the kinds of differences that we would only do with a Prince of Peace. And that's why I got back to Irongo's argument, a discussion about the Art of War by Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu is arguing that the best case scenario is when there is no war and you recognize the authority as it is because it has brought itself and made itself royal, to be obeyed.
Yeah.
So here, Raila Odinga, as the leader of opposition, need to be His Majesty's royal opposition. Now, what does that mean? Not His Majesty, but this time, because we don't have a Majesty, Kenya's royal opposition. In other words, he has royalty to Kenya.
The government in waiting.
Well, call it so. At the same time, William Ruto we need to stop some of the thinking that is going around. It is true. The Hasra versus dynasties is what is really determining this kind of, particularly among the young politicians. Take it from me. The young politicians, the incoming, KK politicians, think that they are on the verge of victory. Why? They have vanquished the dynasties in Mount Kenya. Long ago, they vanquished the dynasties in the Rift Valley. And they finished the business in 2022.
But they think they can do that to Odinga as well.
Now, the young thinkers think that they are going to vanquish the dynasty in Nyanza and liberate the Nyanza. No, don't say they are mistaken. No, don't say they are mistaken.
They are mistaken.
They might not be. Let me finish. So, if this Hasra dynasties take that formation of war rather than of peace, then we are at a problem. So what we need to do at this juncture? One, I think we need to stop this mentality of building Kenya on the basis of 2027, because much of this conflict is about 2027. Why Odinga is calling for the Electoral Commission to be reformulated is basically to set the stage for 2027, because the game of 2022 is over. So 2027. So the dispute about the formation and the organization of Electoral Commission is not about now. It's about 2027. So we need to ensure that we have a Prince of Peace on top of our land, and two, Odinga should stop mass action, because mass action is now conceived is war. The way it has been articulated is about going to State House. Going to this legitimation and all, it is war. So however you want to see it. Two or three, the KK politicians need to tone down the rhetoric. You are not defeating anybody. If you defeat me and I go to exile, I'll come back the way Kagame came back. So what are you going to do about me? Kagame went back on his mother's back, went away to Uganda, and he came back, and now he's in Rwanda. His opponents are in Congo. You don't know how they are going to come back. So we need to stop this cycle of, short-term victories. Tone down rhetoric. And on a lighter note, the rains are here. Go planting. Don't go to the streets.
Deval. All right. Deval, it's my turn, I think. Can I just reply to some of the things that I disagree with? The great Shakespeare once said that words without thoughts never to heaven go. Because we're talking about the Prince of Peace. So heaven too is part of the Prince of Peace, Deval. The idea that Mr. Odinga should stop mass action without an institutional assessment of what brings out these mass action is actually just apologizing for the power structure in this country. I disagree with that. I feel that the country is bigger than the power structure. Although I do agree that Mr. Kagwanja is right on one thing, that the radical wing of the UDA is causing more problems than any rebuilding of the political realignment that we need in this country.
I need to interrupt you because we have a breaking news here, and we need to report it here. My director may just pick up the picture of the Member of Parliament for Banisha. This is MP Kulo Malim, has succumbed, dies while receiving treatment in hospital after he was hit by